Thank you. You guys have already heard me, so I'll try to be brief. But I do want to do justice to what was a really amazing and very lively discussion from our table. We dealt with two things together, if you will, cloud and digital sovereignty, and they sort of melted into one. A lot of the points you guys have made were echoed at our table too. 5 quick points, I guess, to summarize what was discussed at our table. The first one was, it was quite surprising, urgency. It was really interesting. Our table, there was just this general tone of incredible, earnest concern and urgency about solving this issue. I mean, some of the quotes were quite extraordinary. I mean, first of all, several people noted President Macron's notion of if we lose digital sovereignty, we lose political sovereignty. So it sort of really felt life and death at our table talking about this issue. We had quotes like, "We're on borrowed time. This is happening now. It's going to be too late soon. We're naive," was a very common theme running throughout the table. So there was a bit of, it wasn't resignation, but there was just a real sort of existential angst going around the table about how can we solve this problem. We had an interesting mix at the table of startups and scale-ups. We had some from the ecosystem like Delivery Hero and Ecosia, and others from the Berlin ecosystem. We had some cloud providers too at the table, also some VCs, and also some policy regulators, people from the ministries. So it was quite a mix. 4, I guess, points, further points about what we had. The definition of sovereignty was an interesting discussion. We actually went a little deeper, just to say, well, let's talk about sovereignty. We actually went German meta and said, what is sovereignty? Which I think was really helpful, because it actually split off into this notion of, let's not just talk about the means of production, like chips and hardware, and let's be in control of our own supply chains, but also actually about IP and design. That was actually a really interesting theme about we need to, when we talk about sovereignty, we need to actually even go further back up the value chain and make sure that our companies are in command and control of the IP and the design that they're creating. The third thought from the table was actually the dominant thing that I would leave you with, which is huge discussion, and almost everybody said the recipe is a Buy European Act. It was really interesting. I mean, it was a very common theme. Almost most of the speakers said and most of them were French, honestly, we really need a Buy European Act. This has to happen now. We have to prescribe that that companies buy cloud services from European providers. Then that split off into a lot of details. How do you do that? So we talked about there was actually disagreement at the table. Also, some of the German voices wanted to be a little more pragmatic and said, maybe we don't need to do that. Maybe let's first find common ground on certification. Maybe we can find a sort of a backdoor way to say buy European. Like, you can buy anything you want as long as it's certified to European standards. Sort of a nice way to say buy European, which is an interesting compromise, perhaps, for the German-French position. There was a lot of discussion, Chris, you just mentioned it, about requests for proposals, public procurement. A really big issue about a key way to sovereignty is to get the state and the communities looking to our own startups and scale-ups to source and to become their customers. We had a lot of discussion, interesting, from the sales side of selling cloud services. We had the notion that CTOs usually it's safer to choose the US company. You know, we have the old American phrase, no one ever got fired for hiring IBM. By the same token, right now, if you're a CTO, you're not going to get fired for going with Google or Azure or Microsoft, or Amazon, unfortunately. And that's a big mindset change to sort of take a risk and buy from the European one. So, and finally, there was a notion also on buy European. Along the theme of naivete, we have to really fight for our startups. It was noted that all of the hyperscalers give our startups 100,000, usually in free cloud services. So imagine the dependencies you're creating if all of your startups are instantly dependent on the US hyperscalers from the very beginning for their data center and for their back office. It's really hard to then tell a scale-up or a startup after 2 or 3 years, okay, now you need to switch to European. So this whole notion, it was really, we need to somehow start a campaign to replace these hyperscalers with this offer, because it was compared to drug dealership. The first one is free. So the Buy European, that really was sort of the Holy Ghost above our whole panel. That was really the topic that went everywhere. Two other final points that were made that I think were also key. The Data Act and interoperability as a key piece was brought up a lot, as well as these data dependencies even in apps. I mean, even if you're buying a software as a service product that's hosted in the US, you can end up with your own company design or other proprietary information locked on a provider, and it's really hard to get it out. And finally, Michael Brame, thank you for the thoughts at the beginning, because all roads lead back to funding. You guys have all talked about it. Funding was really seen as a key. We talked a lot about how can we get more capital in Europe and liquidity in the capital markets. So it's great that we have the European Investment Fund here, and this topic is front and center, because even on cloud and sovereignty, once again, we found ourselves saying we've got to pool European private capital. We've got to get more of our own capital into our innovation ecosystem. That's going to be the key to becoming sovereign.
Well, thank you very much.